The night was alive with music, laughter, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Outside, New York City shimmered under a blanket of lights. But inside the Grand Crest Hotel, everything sparkled even brighter. The ballroom glowed in gold and crystal, filled with people who lived lives most could only dream of. Billionaires, actors, and politicians moved from one conversation to another, their laughter echoing softly beneath the chandelier's light. At the back of the hall, quietly moving between tables, was a young waitress. Her black uniform was spotless, her hair neatly tied back and her hands steady despite the weight of the silver tray she carried. She'd been working since early morning, yet there was no sign of complaint on her face. She had learned long ago how to smile even when her feet ached. She wasn't like the guests she served. Her life was small, simple, and often hard. She lived in a tiny apartment across the river, where the sound of traffic replaced the silence of dreams. But every time she looked at the piano sitting near the stage, her heart tugged. She had always loved music. Long before life became about bills and long shifts, she used to sing. Not for fame, not for money, just because it made her feel alive. That night, though, she wasn't thinking about her old dream. She was focused on doing her job well, keeping her head down, and avoiding the notice of the rich guests. But fate had a strange way of finding people who wanted to stay hidden. At the center of the room sat a man whose name everyone knew. He was a billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the city. People whispered about his wealth, his sharp mind, and his unpredictable temper. He wasn't cruel exactly, but he liked control. He enjoyed watching others bend to his will, even in small ways. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink as he watched the guests. He looked bored. The speeches had ended. The music had grown repetitive, and he needed something new to amuse him. His assistant, standing beside him, leaned down and whispered that one of the waitresses used to be a singer. The billionaire raised an eyebrow. "A singer?" he repeated, sounding both curious and amused. "Here?" He turned to look toward the waitress. She didn't notice him at first. She was busy collecting empty glasses from a nearby table. She looked too ordinary to draw attention, except for her eyes. They carried something that didn't belong to this room. "Call her over," he said softly. His assistant hesitated. "Sir, she's working." But the billionaire smiled thinly. "So am I." When the assistant approached her, she felt a knot tighten in her chest. She thought she might have done something wrong. "Mister," the assistant began, then caught himself before saying the billionaire's name out loud. "He would like to speak with you." Her stomach turned. She placed her tray on a nearby table and walked toward the group. The crowd near him parted slightly, curious to see what was going on. The billionaire studied her for a moment, tapping his fingers against his glass. "Tell me," he said in a smooth voice, "is it true you sing?" Her cheeks flushed. "I used to," she said quietly. "A long time ago." He leaned back, clearly entertained. "Used to, why not now?" She hesitated. "Life got busy," she replied. He smiled, the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable. "Well, we have time tonight. Sing something for us." Her eyes widened. I can't, sir. I'm working." "Then consider this part of your work," he said. His tone wasn't cruel, but it left no space for refusal. The room went still. Conversation stopped. The band paused. Everyone turned to watch the waitress, who now stood frozen under the chandelier's glow. Her hands fidgeted against her apron. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, some curious, some pitying, some amused. "I really can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. The billionaire raised a brow. "You mean you won't?" A quiet laugh moved through the crowd, polite but sharp. She looked around helplessly, wishing she could disappear. The manager stood at the edge of the room, unsure whether to step in. The pianist, an older man with kind eyes, gave her a small nod from his seat near the stage. "You can do this," he mouthed silently. She looked down, her breath unsteady. Every instinct told her to walk away, to quit right then and there. But something inside her wouldn't let her. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the memory of who she used to be. "If I sing," she said softly, "then only one song." The billionaire smiled and gestured to the pianist. "One song, then. Let's hear what the voice of our waitress sounds like." The pianist adjusted his bench and began to play a slow, simple melody. The sound of the keys filled the air like soft rain. She stood there, her throat tight, her palms sweating. For a moment, she couldn't even find her voice. The guests waited, whispering to one another. And then she began. Her first words came out almost too quiet to hear. Her voice shook like someone learning to stand again after a long fall, but she closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and continued. Slowly, her tone steadied. Each note grew stronger than the one before. The song wasn't fancy or loud, it was something soft and honest. It spoke of waiting, of holding on when everything around you falls apart. It wasn't just a melody. It was a story, and though her voice wasn't perfect, it had something far rarer. Truth. The laughter stopped. The whispers faded. People leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. Even the servers paused in the corners, trays still in hand. Her song floated through the room, gentle but powerful. It carried pain and hope in the same breath. The billionaire, who had started the moment with amusement, now sat completely still. His hand, still holding his drink, didn't move. Something in her voice pulled him somewhere else, somewhere far from the golden glass around him. When she reached the chorus, her voice rose higher. It wasn't loud, but it filled the hall like light through a window. The pianist followed her lead, his fingers trembling slightly as he played. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. Another clasped her hands against her chest. Even the staff standing near the back looked moved. It was as if for those few minutes the world outside the ballroom had vanished. When the song ended, she held the final note for a moment before letting it fade. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of city traffic, but not a single voice. She looked up, unsure what to do. Her throat was dry. She expected laughter again, or maybe a polite clap. But instead, the billionaire stood. He didn't speak. He just clapped, slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in, and within seconds, the entire hall was filled with applause. Her face flushed, her hands shaking. She wanted to cry, but didn't. She bowed slightly and whispered, "Thank you." The billionaire took a step forward. For the first time that night, his smile wasn't mocking. "That," he said quietly, "was something worth listening to." She nodded, unable to find words. As she turned to leave the stage area, the pianist gave her a small smile and whispered, "Told you." She smiled back, though her heart was still racing. When she returned to the staff area, her co-workers surrounded her with soft cheers and hugs. The manager, who had been worried about the scene, just shook his head and said, "You've got more courage than anyone in this room." She didn't feel courageous. She just felt relieved that it was over. But deep down there was something else, something warm and alive. For the first time in years, she had felt like herself again. Back in the main hall, the billionaire sat down, lost in thought. The room slowly returned to its chatter and laughter, but his mind stayed quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that her voice had touched something he'd forgotten existed. He looked around at the people, the lights, the glasses of wine, and realized that for all his wealth, nothing in that room had felt as real as that one song. And somewhere behind the scenes, the waitress leaned against a wall, her eyes closed, replaying the sound of her own voice in her mind. She didn't know it yet, but that one song had just changed everything. The next morning, the sun poured through the tall windows of the Grand Crest Hotel. The ballroom that had been filled with laughter and applause only hours ago was now quiet. The floor was scattered with empty glasses, napkins, and the faint smell of perfume. Workers moved quietly, cleaning up after the glamorous night. In the kitchen, the young waitress stood at the corner counter, tying her apron. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying what happened the night before, every note, every breath, and the thunder of applause that followed. It didn't feel real. She'd been invisible for so long that the memory of standing in the center of that room still made her heart race. "Hey," one of the other waiters said with a grin as he passed by. "You were incredible last night." "I didn't know you could sing like that," she smiled shyly. "Thanks." "I didn't either, not anymore." "Everyone's been talking about it," he continued. "Even the boss said you made the night unforgettable." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments weren't something she was used to. She'd spent years serving people who barely looked at her face, let alone noticed her voice. When she finished her shift and stepped outside, the city greeted her with its usual noise: horns, voices, the rush of footsteps. Life moved on, just like it always did. Yet for her, something had changed. She took the subway home, standing by the door as usual, but her reflection in the window looked different. There was a small spark in her eyes, a quiet reminder that the girl who once dreamed of singing was still alive somewhere inside her. Her phone buzzed as she walked up the stairs to her apartment. It was a message from the hotel manager asking her to stop by the office before her next shift. She froze, thinking she might be in trouble. Maybe she'd broken some rule by performing during work. The thought made her stomach twist. That night she could hardly eat. She sat by her small kitchen window, staring out at the blinking city lights. She hummed softly to herself, the same melody she had sung at the gala. For the first time in years, her voice felt like home. When she arrived at work the next day, the manager greeted her with an unusual smile. "You're not in trouble," he said quickly, as if reading her thoughts. "Actually, the hotel received several calls this morning. People wanted to know who the singer was last night." Her eyes widened. "Calls about me?" He nodded. "Apparently someone recorded your performance. It's been shared online. You've got thousands of views already." She blinked, unable to believe it. "Someone filmed it?" "Yes," he said, leaning back in his chair. "And there's something else. The man from last night, the billionaire, he called too. He asked for your full name." Her heart skipped. "Why?" He didn't say much. Just that he wanted to speak to you personally. "I told him I'd pass the message." She stood there in silence, unsure whether to be nervous or excited. The same man who had forced her to sing now wanted to talk again. She didn't know what to make of it. That evening, when she got home, she found a message waiting on her phone. It was short and polite. "I owe you an apology and perhaps a conversation. Meet me tomorrow, same place, 4 p.m. She read it several times. The words "owe you an apology" stood out the most. For some reason, they made her chest tighten. The next day, she arrived at the hotel early. The ballroom was empty except for the billionaire sitting at a small table near the stage. He wasn't surrounded by assistants or security this time, just him, a cup of coffee, and that calm look of someone deep in thought. When she walked in, he stood up immediately. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. She nodded, unsure what to say. "I wanted to apologize," he began. "What I did that night was wrong. I thought it would be amusing to make you sing, and I didn't think about how humiliating it might have felt. But when you started and I heard your voice, I realized I'd made a fool of myself, not you." His tone was sincere. She didn't see the proud, untouchable man from before. He seemed softer now, almost human. "I didn't expect any of that to happen," she said honestly. "I just didn't want to disappoint everyone." "You didn't," he replied. "You did the opposite. You silenced a room full of people who never stopped talking. That's rare." She smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. He continued, "You said you used to sing. Why did you stop?" She hesitated. "Life happened. I couldn't afford music school. My mother got sick and I needed to work. One job led to another, and before I knew it, years had passed." He nodded slowly, as if the words carried more weight than she realized. "I understand," he said. "Sometimes life steals the things we love, piece by piece." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "If I told you I could help you start again, would you believe me?" She looked up, startled. "Help me how?" "I have friends in the music industry," he said simply. "Producers, managers, people who owe me favors. I could introduce you to someone who can help you record. You deserve a chance." Her instinct told her not to trust offers that sounded too good. "I appreciate that," she said carefully, "but I don't want anything for free." He smiled faintly. "Good, because I wasn't offering charity. I'm offering opportunity. The rest will be up to you." She stared at him, unsure whether to say yes. She had dreamed of this all her life, but fear had a strong voice too. What if she failed? What if the world only saw her as a waitress pretending to sing? He seemed to read her thoughts. "You don't have to decide right now," he said kindly, "but don't let fear be the reason you walk away." When she left that day, her heart felt heavy but hopeful. That night, she sat by her window again, listening to the sounds of the city. The video of her performance had already gained over 500,000 views. Comments flooded in from strangers who said her song had touched their hearts. People wrote things like, "Her voice feels like honesty, and you can hear her soul when she sings." She scrolled through them, tears filling her eyes. She had spent years thinking no one saw her, yet now thousands of people were moved by her voice. The next morning, she made her decision. She texted the billionaire, "I'm ready to try." Within hours, she received an address, his private office downtown. When she arrived, she was greeted by a woman in a sharp suit who introduced herself as a talent consultant. The billionaire joined them shortly after, still polite but now more like a mentor than a stranger. They discussed plans, recording options, and small venues where she could start performing. It all felt unreal. The consultant arranged a vocal session for her that same week. For the first time, she stepped into a real recording studio, a place she had only imagined in her dreams. When she put on the headphones and heard the first instrumental play, her hands trembled. She closed her eyes and began to sing. The same song she'd sung that night at the gala flowed through the speakers. But this time it felt different, free, confident, alive. The sound engineer turned to the billionaire and whispered, "She's got something special." He nodded quietly. "I know." Over the next few weeks, she worked hard, balancing her shifts at the hotel with recording sessions. She didn't tell many people what she was doing. It felt too fragile, too precious to explain. But word started to spread. People recognized her from the viral video. Guests at the hotel began asking for photos. A local journalist reached out for an interview, calling her the singing waitress who stole New York's heart. Every step forward felt like walking through a dream she was afraid to wake from. But deep down, she knew she had earned this moment. One evening, after another long day, she received a message from the billionaire. "You'll be performing again soon. This time on your own stage." She read it twice, her hands shaking. It wasn't just an offer. It was a promise. She looked out her window again at the glittering city skyline, the same view that once made her feel small. But tonight it looked different. The lights didn't seem so far away anymore, and as she whispered the lyrics of her song softly into the night air, she knew something for sure. This was just the beginning. The sound of her own voice still felt unreal every time she played back the recording. Sitting in the small studio room, she watched through the glass as the sound engineer adjusted the controls. The billionaire stood quietly in the corner, arms crossed, watching her with a kind of focus that made her nervous. It had been only 3 weeks since that unforgettable night at the hotel, but her life already felt completely different. She still worked part-time at the restaurant, but now there were mornings when she woke up with a reason to smile. For once, she wasn't just serving others. She was creating something of her own. The studio was small but filled with energy. The sound engineer played back her latest take, and the room filled with the soft melody of her voice. It was the same song that had silenced the ballroom weeks ago, but now it was cleaner, warmer, and alive with emotion. When the final note faded, the billionaire spoke softly. "You're improving faster than I expected." She laughed nervously. "I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing." "That's a good thing," he said, smiling faintly. "People who think they know everything usually stop learning." She nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I just want to make something real, something that reminds people they're not alone." The billionaire studied her quietly, then looked at the producer. "Send me the file once it's mixed." That evening, as they walked out of the studio together, the city air felt colder. The billionaire walked beside her, not saying much. He wasn't the same man who had once mocked her in front of a crowd. There was something quieter about him now, something thoughtful. "I know you still don't trust my intentions," he said after a long silence, "and you have every reason not to. But this project means something to me too." She looked at him curiously. "Why? You could invest in anyone." "Why me?" he smiled faintly. "Because when you sang that night, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" He paused before answering. "What it feels like to feel small, and to still try." She didn't know what to say. For a moment, she saw not a billionaire, but a man who had once known struggle. The next few weeks moved fast. She started training with a vocal coach the billionaire arranged for her. Every day after her shift at the hotel, she'd rush to the studio, still wearing her black uniform under her coat. She practiced until her voice cracked, until every line of every song felt like a piece of her own story. One night, as she was leaving the studio, her coach stopped her. "There's a charity event next month," he said. "They're looking for performers. You should sing there. It could be your first real audience." Her heart raced. The idea of standing before a crowd again terrified her, but it also thrilled her. "Do you really think I'm ready?" He smiled. "You were ready the night you sang in that ballroom. You just didn't know it." When she told the billionaire about it, he nodded in approval. "I'll take care of the details," he said. "You focus on the song." The following weeks were a blur of rehearsals, late nights, and quiet self-doubt. Some days she woke up feeling confident, and other days she wanted to give up. But every time she thought about quitting, she remembered the sound of that applause in the ballroom, the way the silence before it had felt like magic. One evening, while practicing in her small apartment, her neighbor knocked on the door. "You've been singing every night," the old woman said, smiling. "Don't stop. It's the only thing that makes these walls feel alive." That simple sentence made her tear up. She realized her music wasn't just for herself anymore. It was for people who needed hope, just like she once did. The night of the charity event arrived faster than she expected. The venue wasn't as large as the Grand Crest Ballroom, but it was elegant and warm, filled with people dressed in their finest. She waited backstage, hands shaking slightly as she looked out through the curtain. The billionaire was there too, sitting in the audience, quiet and proud. Her coach touched her shoulder. "You'll be fine," he whispered. "Just sing from the same place you did the first time." When her name was announced, the lights dimmed. She stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding. The microphone stood before her like a gate she had to walk through. For a moment she froze. But then she saw the faces in the crowd, strangers waiting, curious, hopeful. She took a deep breath and began to sing. This time her voice didn't tremble. It was soft, steady, full of warmth. The song was new, one she had written herself with her coach's help. It spoke of second chances, of finding courage when the world stops believing in you. Every note carried a story, every word a memory. The audience listened in complete silence, just like before. Some smiled, some wiped tears from their eyes, and when the final note faded, there was a moment of stillness before applause filled the room again. Louder, longer, fuller than she had ever imagined. Backstage, her coach hugged her tightly. "You did it," he said. When she stepped outside the venue later that night, she found the billionaire waiting by his car. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a check, far larger than she had ever seen, and a short note that read, "For your first song. Don't let it be your last." She looked up at him, speechless. "I can't take this," she said softly. "You can," he replied. "Because it's not a gift. It's an investment. But why help me this much?" she asked again. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because once upon a time someone helped me when I didn't deserve it either." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights shimmered around them, the sound of traffic humming in the background. Finally, she nodded, holding the envelope to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. In the following days, everything began to change. Her performance was covered by local news. The video of the event spread online, drawing millions of views. People started calling her the voice of courage. Messages poured in from strangers across the world, some saying her song helped them through loss, others saying it gave them hope. But fame wasn't what she felt. What she felt was gratitude. Every comment reminded her of why she sang, to remind people that even in silence there's strength. One morning she received a call from a small record label. They had seen her performance and wanted to meet. When she told the billionaire, he simply smiled. "You don't need me anymore," he said. "Yes, I do," she replied softly. "You believed in me before I did." He looked away for a moment, then said, "You'll go farther if you keep believing in yourself." As weeks passed, she signed her first contract, a modest one, but enough to make her dream real. She recorded her first official single, the same song she had sung at the charity event. When it was released, it climbed the charts faster than anyone expected. The billionaire watched from afar, proud but quiet. He didn't attend the press events or interviews. He didn't need to. He had already played his part. One evening, months later, she invited him to her first public concert. It was held in a mid-sized theater filled with fans. He sat at the very back, hidden in the shadows, as her voice filled the room again, and when she sang the final line, she looked out into the crowd and said softly, "This song is for the person who reminded me that kindness can change everything." The audience clapped without knowing who she was talking about. But he knew. After the show, she found a single note waiting in her dressing room. It said, "Keep singing. The world needs your voice." She smiled as she read it, her eyes glistening with tears. She didn't know what the future would bring, fame, fortune, or just another song, but she knew one thing for sure. Her journey had only just begun, because sometimes One small act of courage can turn an ordinary life into something extraordinary. And sometimes one song really can stop the world for a moment and change two lives forever. Months had passed since her first concert, but the memory of that night still felt fresh. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the roar of the crowd, see the lights flashing across the stage, and feel that wave of disbelief that she, the same woman who once carried trays in silence, was now standing in front of hundreds of people who came to hear her sing. Life had changed faster than she ever imagined. Her days were filled with rehearsals, interviews, and studio sessions. The girl who once counted tips to pay rent was now learning about contracts, royalties, and schedules. It all felt strange, almost unreal. But she never let the excitement push away her humility. Every time she walked past a restaurant or saw a waitress balancing plates, she remembered where she came from. Still, success came with its own kind of weight. The pressure grew heavier with each performance. Her songs were being played on the radio now. Her face appeared in magazines, and people expected her to keep delivering that same emotional magic she'd shown the first time. Sometimes, when she was alone, she wondered if she could live up to all of it. The billionaire, who had quietly helped her rise, kept his distance but always checked in. Every few weeks, he would send a short message. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple "proud of you" or "keep going. Don't lose yourself." She appreciated those words more than he probably realized. One afternoon, she was sitting in the studio, exhausted after a long session. Her producer suggested a break, and she stepped outside to get some air. The city buzzed with energy, cars honking, people hurrying by, but she felt oddly quiet inside. A young man approached her shyly. "Excuse me," he said. "You're the singer from that video, right? The one from the hotel?" She smiled softly. "Yes, that was me." His eyes lit up. "My mom used to play that song every night when she was sick. It made her smile even on the bad days." She said your voice felt honest. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." He nodded and left, but his words stayed with her. For hours afterward, she couldn't stop thinking about how a song she sang out of fear and courage had found its way into people's lives. It reminded her that music wasn't about fame, it was about connection. That evening, she called the billionaire. It had been weeks since they last spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you," she told him. "For what?" he asked. "For everything. For believing in me when no one else did." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't owe me thanks," he said softly. "You did the work. I just opened a door." "I still don't know why you did it," she admitted. He laughed lightly. "Maybe because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself. Or maybe I just needed to remember what real courage looks like." There was a pause, a comfortable silence that said more than words could. Then he added, "You're doing well, but remember, fame is loud. Don't let it drown out your truth." She promised she wouldn't. As the weeks turned into months, her career continued to rise. She performed on television, appeared at charity galas, and collaborated with other artists. But fame, like a bright light, had its shadows. People began to talk about her not just as a singer but as a story, a symbol of the girl who went from waitress to star. Some loved her for it. Others doubted her talent, saying her success was just luck. One evening, while scrolling through social media, she came across a cruel comment under her latest performance. She only got famous because of that billionaire. Without him, she'd still be serving drinks. The word stung. She knew it wasn't true, but it still hurt. She had worked hard, spent sleepless nights practicing, writing, and pushing herself past her fears. Yet a stranger's words managed to plant a seed of doubt. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window again, the same window where she once hummed her first melody months ago. The city looked as restless as she felt. She picked up her phone and typed a message to the billionaire. "Do people ever stop doubting you when you become successful?" A few minutes later, his reply came, "No, they just find new ways to question you. But that's how you know you're doing something that matters." She smiled faintly. It was the kind of advice that came from someone who had lived long enough to understand how the world worked. The next morning, she went back to the studio, determined to write a new song, not about fame or love, but about truth. She wanted to tell her story honestly, the fear, the struggle, the moment when a single chance changed everything. Her producer listened as she played the rough version on the piano. "It's raw," he said, "but it's real. This could be your best work yet." When the song was finished, she titled it "Before the Lights." It was a song about who she was before the applause, before the headlines. When the recording was complete, she asked to release it quietly, without big promotion. "I just want people to feel it," she said. The song came out on a rainy Thursday evening. There was no marketing push, no interviews, just a simple upload online. But within hours it began spreading everywhere. People connected to the honesty in her words. They could hear the story of a person who had been small, afraid and overlooked, and had still found her voice. Messages poured in again. One read, "This song made me cry. I felt like it was my own story." Another said, "Thank you for reminding us that it's okay to start over." The billionaire called her that night. "I listened to it," he said. "You sound free," she smiled through the phone. "That's what I wanted, to sound like myself again." He laughed softly. "Then you've done it." But soon after, she learned that the charity where she had first performed months ago wanted her to come back, this time as the main act. The thought of returning to the place where her second chance had truly begun made her nervous but excited. It felt like life had come full circle. On the night of the event, she stood backstage again, her hands trembling just like before. But this time it wasn't fear, it was gratitude. The audience was larger now, the lights brighter, but the feeling in her heart was the same. Before stepping onto the stage, she spotted the billionaire in the front row. He wasn't dressed like the powerful man everyone knew from business magazines. He looked simple, relaxed, almost proud, like a father watching a child succeed. She walked onto the stage and the crowd erupted in applause. When the music started, she closed her eyes and began to sing the song that had changed everything, the one from that night at the hotel. But now it sounded different. It wasn't trembling or uncertain. It was full of strength of the life she had lived since then. The lyrics, once born of fear, now felt like triumph. By the time she reached the final note, the hall was silent again, just like before. But this time she didn't feel small. She felt whole. When the applause began, she looked down at the billionaire. He stood up slowly, clapping with everyone else. Their eyes met for a moment, and no words were needed. They both knew what that moment meant. After the show, as she was leaving, she found him waiting near the exit. "You were incredible," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied. "It feels like everything started right here." He nodded. "Sometimes life brings us back to where it all began, not to repeat it, but to show us how far we've come." She smiled, and they stood there for a moment, both remembering the night that had changed both their lives. As she walked out into the cool night air, she realized something. Success wasn't about fame, money, or applause. It was about moments like these, moments that reminded her of her own journey, her own strength, and the kindness that had once turned humiliation into hope. And as the city lights reflected in her eyes, she whispered to herself, "This is where I was meant to be." The months after that night passed in a blur of music, travel, and unexpected changes. The singer's life had become something she never thought possible. There were interviews, stage lights, cameras, and endless questions from people who wanted to know everything about her story. But despite all the new attention, she stayed grounded. Deep down, she was still that same woman who once wiped tables and hummed songs quietly to herself. Her days started early, often with rehearsals or songwriting sessions. Her manager and small team tried to organize her schedule, but fame had a way of taking over everything. Sometimes she longed for silence, a day with no microphones, no lenses pointed at her face, just peace. Yet she knew this was what she had once dreamed about. So even when she was tired, she smiled, sang, and kept moving forward. One evening, after a long day at the recording studio, she went for a walk along the river. The city lights shimmered on the water's surface. A soft wind carried the sound of laughter from people dining at nearby cafes. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing it all in. She thought of how far she had come, and how strange it was that everything had begun with one song. One moment she never saw coming. While she stood by the river, she heard footsteps approach from behind. It was the billionaire. He had been in town for a business conference and decided to find her quietly, without any announcement or cameras. "I thought I'd find you near music or water," he said with a small smile. She laughed. "You always show up when I least expect it." He looked at her carefully. "You look tired," he said gently. "Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm trying," she replied. "It's just a lot." Everyone expects something new from me all the time. A new song, a new story, a new version of me. He nodded slowly. Fame is like a fire, he said. It can warm you or it can burn you. You have to decide how close to stand. She thought about his words for a long moment. Sometimes I wish I could go back, she said softly. Just for a day. To when things were simple. Maybe that's why you sing so beautifully, he said. You still remember what it's like to be unseen. They sat together on a bench by the river, talking quietly about life, choices, and the strange balance between success and peace. He told her about his own struggles, how even with all his money there were nights when he couldn't sleep, haunted by the emptiness of success without purpose. I've spent my whole life chasing numbers, he admitted, but when you sang that night it reminded me that some things can't be bought or measured. She smiled. That's the thing about music, it makes people feel human again. After a while they said goodbye, promising to stay in touch. She walked home that night feeling lighter. It was strange how a simple conversation could bring her back to herself. The next week, her team received an invitation for her to perform at a global charity event. It was a massive opportunity, broadcasted live with some of the world's most famous artists and public figures attending. She hesitated for a moment, but then said yes. She wanted to use her voice for something bigger than herself. The days leading up to the event were filled with preparation. She worked on her set list carefully, wanting to perform something that truly represented her journey. The night before the event, she stayed alone in her hotel room, sitting by the window with her guitar. She played quietly, trying to calm her nerves. Every chord carried memories, the diner, the laughter, the humiliation that had started everything, and the courage that grew from it. When the night finally arrived, the hall was filled with people from around the world. The billionaire was there too, sitting near the front, but he kept a low profile as usual. The lights dimmed, and one by one, performers took the stage. She watched from backstage, her heart pounding harder with every song that ended. Finally, it was her turn. She stepped out slowly. The room was vast, the crowd endless. For a second, she froze, feeling the same fear she had felt that first night when everything began. But then she looked out and saw a few faces smiling up at her, people who believed in her. That was enough. She took a deep breath and began to sing. The song was new, one she had written only a few weeks earlier. It wasn't about fame or heartbreak, it was about hope. It told the story of a person who fell, got lost, and stood up again. The melody started soft, but as it built, her voice grew stronger, fuller, filled with the emotion of everything she had lived through. The hall grew silent. Even the camera stopped moving. When she hit the final note, the entire room stood still for a heartbeat, and then erupted into applause. People were crying. Some stood clapping through tears. The billionaire watched quietly, his eyes shining with pride. After the performance, as she walked backstage, reporters rushed toward her, microphones flashing. But before she could speak to anyone, someone tapped her shoulder. It was a woman in her 50s, dressed simply, holding a small notebook. Your song, the woman said, her voice trembling. It gave me strength. I lost my job months ago and I've been feeling hopeless, but listening to you made me remember who I was before life got heavy. Thank you. The singer's eyes filled with tears. She hugged the woman gently. You just reminded me why I sing, she whispered. Later that night, when the lights had dimmed and the crowd had gone home, she found herself standing alone on the empty stage. The echo of her voice still lingered in the air. She looked out at the rows of empty seats and smiled. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that her purpose had become bigger than music. It was about reminding people of their own strength. The billionaire found her there. You were extraordinary, he said. She looked up at him, smiling faintly. You've said that before? And I'll keep saying it, he replied. Because every time you sing, you make people remember something they'd forgotten about themselves. She looked down for a moment, then said softly, I think that's what you did for me, too. He didn't answer right away. He simply nodded and looked around the hall, as if he could still feel the echo of her song in the air. Over the next few weeks, her life continued to change. She received invitations from all over the world, concerts, collaborations, events. But instead of chasing everything, she began to choose carefully. She wanted her music to stay real. She didn't want to lose herself in noise. She started a small foundation to support young people who loved music but couldn't afford lessons or instruments. She called it the First Note Project, inspired by the song that had started it all. When the billionaire heard about it, he quietly became its first donor, but he refused to take any public credit. "It's your vision," he said when she thanked him. "Let it be your light." Years later, when people spoke about her, they didn't just talk about her voice. They talked about her kindness, her honesty, and the way she always made people believe again. She had gone from being invisible to unforgettable, not because of fame, but because of heart. One quiet morning, she visited the small diner where she used to work. The building looked almost the same, the smell of coffee, the soft hum of conversations. The new waitress didn't recognize her, and that made her smile. She sat in a corner booth watching as people came and went, living ordinary lives just like she once did. As she sipped her coffee, she thought about the billionaire, about the song, and about how one unexpected moment had changed the course of her life. She realized that miracles don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they come disguised as challenges, pushing us to become who we're meant to be. Before leaving, she placed a small envelope under her cup. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "For whoever needs a new beginning, believe in your song." There was also enough money to cover the waitress's next few months of rent. She didn't sign her name. When she stepped outside, the sun was rising, painting the city gold. She walked down the familiar street with a quiet smile. She didn't need applause anymore. The world could forget her name if it wanted to. All that mattered was that somewhere, someone might find strength in the echo of her song. And as the wind brushed against her hair, she whispered to herself, maybe this was the real dream all along, not to be seen, but to make others see what's possible. Years later, her life looked nothing like it once had. The girl who used to carry trays and dream quietly had become a woman whose music touched hearts all over the world. But despite everything, the fame, the awards, the long tours, she never forgot where her story began. She had built a home in a quiet part of the countryside, far from the flashing lights and endless noise of the city. The house wasn't huge or fancy. It was warm, filled with sunlight, old records and handwritten lyrics scattered across wooden tables. When people visited, they always said the same thing. It felt peaceful there, like the walls themselves carried music. She spent her mornings walking along the narrow path that ran beside a small lake near her home. Sometimes she carried her guitar. Sometimes she just listened to the sound of birds. It was in those moments of silence that she found new ideas for songs. But now her music wasn't about proving anything. It was about sharing, about healing. Her foundation, the First Note Project, had grown into something far bigger than she ever imagined. Hundreds of young people from small towns and poor neighborhoods were learning music, performing, and finding confidence in their voices. She often visited their schools quietly without making it public. She would sit in the back and listen as a child sang shyly into the microphone, remembering her own trembling voice all those years ago. One afternoon, after a long drive back from one of those visits, she received a call that made her pause. It was from an assistant of the billionaire. The voice on the other end sounded soft, almost hesitant. "He's been unwell," the assistant said. "He's asking to see you." Her heart sank. Though they hadn't spoken much in recent months, she always felt connected to him. Without him, her story would have never started. Without his kindness that night, she might still be serving tables, unaware of her own gift. She packed a small bag and left the next morning. When she arrived at his estate, it was quiet. The tall trees swayed in the gentle wind, and the air smelled of earth after rain. She was led to a room with large windows that opened to a garden. The billionaire sat in a chair, thinner now, his once sharp eyes softer but still bright with warmth. When he saw her, he smiled. "You came," he said, his voice weak but full of emotion. "Of course I came," she said, pulling a chair beside him. "You didn't think I'd stay away, did you?" He chuckled lightly. "I wasn't sure. You're busy and I'm just an old man now." "Don't say that," she replied gently. "You're the reason I found my song." He looked at her for a long time, as if replaying every moment since that night in the hotel. "You know," he said finally, "that night changed me too. I had spent years surrounded by wealth but empty inside. Hearing you sing reminded me what it meant to feel something real." She smiled sadly. "You gave me a chance when no one else did. I'll never forget that." They sat together for hours, talking about life, about what it meant to leave something behind. At one point he said, Money can build walls or bridges. I'm glad I used some of mine to build a bridge for you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You built more than that. You built hope." Before she left, he took her hand and said quietly, "Promise me something." "Anything," she said. "When people talk about your success, don't let them forget the waitress who sang her truth. Keep her alive in your heart. That's where your real power is." She nodded, unable to speak. A few weeks later, he passed away peacefully. When she got the call, she sat silently for a long time, holding her guitar close. The world saw him as a powerful businessman, but to her, he had been something far greater. A reminder that compassion could change a life. At his memorial, she was asked to sing. The hall was filled with people from all over the world, leaders, artists, and strangers whose lives he had touched quietly. She stood in front of them, her voice calm but trembling with emotion. She sang the same song she had performed that night years ago, when everything began. The melody carried through the room like a whisper of gratitude and memory. People closed their eyes, some wiping tears. And as her voice filled the air, she knew he could hear her wherever he was. After the memorial, she walked through his garden one last time. The flowers swayed in the wind, and somewhere in the distance a bird sang. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself." Time moved on. Seasons changed. Her fame continued, but she no longer chased it. Instead, she focused on mentoring young artists, guiding them not just in music but in life. She told them what the billionaire once told her, that the world will always test your worth, but your truth must come from within. One day, years later, a journalist visited her for an interview about her life. He asked the usual questions about success and awards, but near the end he said, "If you could go back and speak to your younger self, the waitress who sang that night, what would you tell her?" She thought for a moment and then smiled. "I'd tell her not to be afraid. I'd tell her that sometimes the hardest nights lead to the brightest mornings, and that kindness from a stranger can rewrite your whole story." The interview went viral not because of her fame but because of her words. People shared it everywhere, saying it reminded them to believe again, in dreams, in humanity, and the quiet power of good people. A few months later, she received a letter from a small-town school in another country. Inside was a drawing made by a child. It showed a girl holding a microphone surrounded by stars with a caption that read, "Thank you for teaching us to sing our truth." Tears rolled down her face as she read it. She placed the drawing on her piano, right beside an old black and white photo of the billionaire. For her, that little piece of paper meant more than any award she had ever received. Years continued to pass. Her hair turned silver. Her voice grew softer, but her spirit never dimmed. Even in her later years, she would still sit by the window with her guitar, singing to the open sky. Sometimes neighbors walking by would stop and listen quietly, not realizing they were hearing a legend. One cool evening, she recorded a short video for her foundation's anniversary. The camera showed her sitting in her living room, the same warmth in her eyes as always. She spoke slowly, her voice gentle. "I once thought a single song couldn't change anything. I was wrong. A song can heal, it can remind people of their worth, it can make strangers feel less alone. But the real miracle isn't the song, it's the courage to sing it." That video became her final message to the world. People replayed it again and again, sharing it with captions like, "This is what grace sounds like." Not long after, on a quiet morning, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by music sheets and sunlight. The news spread quickly and people everywhere mourned her loss. But even more, they celebrated her life, the waitress who became a voice for millions. At her memorial, one of the students from her foundation sang her song, the same song that had changed her life years ago. When the last note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And just like that first night so long ago, the world fell silent for a moment, not out of sadness, but out of awe. Some stories begin with fame or fortune. Hers began with a simple song, a moment of courage, and a man who saw something beautiful in a frightened young woman. Together, they prove that kindness and talent can meet in the most unexpected places, and that when they do, the result can echo for generations. In the end, her story wasn't about music or wealth. It was about connection, courage, and the power of a single moment to change everything. And somewhere, in the stillness of the world, her song kept playing, softly, endlessly, reminding people everywhere that sometimes even one voice can stop the world cold.